Welcome for one final time for now to the Bahrain International Circuit, and pre-season testing is done and dusted. The sun has set on day 3, and here is everything that we have learned, not just from today, but from the 3 days spent here in Bahrain. Lawrence Barretto, Alex Brundle joining me once again to talk through the action on track, the action off track, and what we're trying to deduce ahead of what is looking to be an incredibly competitive and close 2025 season. We'll start with headlines today then. George Russell was quickest, and it was hotter. There too for you, Lawrence. Can you add in anything else?
Yeah, they are both correct.
Yes.
So, I think today was the day where I was talking about Mercedes being the great unknown yesterday, and I feel like they really showed up today. And I wasn't saying they were hiding anything yesterday, it was just the course of their plan. But I think both Kimi Antonelli and George Russell just looked genuinely very good in everything that they put together out on track today. And look, we're not reading into the headline times, but we are reading into the fact that they had a very productive, very comfortable day out there. The car looked good. Kimi was we'll talk about this later, but he was done such a great job. And George was able to pump these times in. So yeah, I was really impressed by what they were able to deliver today.
We were expecting Red Bull to show up a little bit more as well today, and they did. With Verstappen, it was a really good lap from him, but only right at the end, because it was a huge stoppage, wasn't it, through the middle of the day for Red Bull, behind the covers for what seemed like almost such a long period of time. It could only be a mechanical failure after we surmised they'd had a mechanical issue as well yesterday for Lawson.
Yeah, there were a fair few teams that spent a lot of time in the garage, a fair few who had floors off as well. Sauber, Mercedes at one point as well, a lot of screens of doom, as I like to call them, being pulled across those garages. But looking at the track conditions today, they were hotter. What does that do to the cars? What does that do to the run plans for these teams?
Well, I mean, I think the track was actually lucky that we had a couple of drivers behind the covers today, because they were starting to wear the track out, weren't they? The Formula One cars have been so unbelievably reliable that actually almost more reliable than the track throughout this couple of days of testing. Circuit today, more normal. In comparison to how you'd normally get it at a Grand Prix here. Andrea Stella said as much in the middle of the day. Warmer temperatures on the circuit surface, of course, make it a little bit slower. The wind picked up today, which, although we had a bit of rain falling yesterday, it was quite still. All of that laid a kind of a slower pace to things, but the general structure of running was quite similar, actually, with the McLaren looking really strong for me.
Yeah, and looking at some of that long-run stuff as well, yesterday Norris was 0.5 clear of Antonelli, today Piastri 0.4 clear of Russell. So even though the track and those times will differ condition to condition, actually the gap seems relatively stable. From what we can deduce, all the testing caveats of fuel loads, sensors, all of that stuff. And actually Andrea Stella said to me at midday, he said, you have to be incredibly careful to take what you will with a pinch of salt, a big pinch of salt, from the long-run data that we're seeing of Lando Norris being 31 seconds up the road from everyone else. But what did you make of it?
But I think, just generally speaking, I think McLaren are very happy with what they've delivered over the last 3 days. And yeah, I think he's probably right, Andrea, when he says, like, don't read too much into it. But look, what McLaren were aiming to achieve when they came here and testing was to have a car that would enable them to fight from the beginning of the season. So they're coming from a slightly different starting point to what they were last year. So even if they aren't ultimately the fastest package out there, I don't think that matters so much. They just want a car that they're happy to be able to be in the fight from the start, and then they'll develop it from there. And from everything that I'm hearing and talking to people inside the team, they are very happy with what they've got. And I think whether or not they are the fastest coming in Australia or the first couple of races, I think they'll be in the fight, and I think that's what they wanted.
They've generally had a good test. It had a bit of a moment this morning with Lando Norris having the car a bit snappy for him. The long run pace, though, is definitely there, especially in the cooler conditions. As soon as we dropped into the night time again, McLaren was super quick. Piastri did do a performance run at the end, though, while Verstappen and Russell were delivering the big laps. Dropped 0.4 in the first sector. Wasn't immediately obvious to me why. So I'm going to have to go and figure out why that was.
Or over the videos.
Exactly, have a look through the videos. And also a little error in the final sector as well. So it wasn't his best ever performance lap. But McLaren, I think, in the hunt on both race pace and in terms of qualifying pace, finished the test, for me at least, as the team to beat.
I think we're going to attempt to put a pecking order of the teams
just to preempt
together.
That
I
part
know,
of the
just
show.
prepare yourselves for that one. Get ready to argue against us. But we're going to try to do that. But I think we'd probably be unanimously putting McLaren at the top. We'll see. We'll see when we get there. Williams with Albon today, P3. Yesterday with Sainz, P1, and Sainz actually claiming the quickest time of all of testing. We aren't going to obviously say, right, well, that means Williams are going to be on the podium and they're up there fighting for championships, but we can say that they might well be up towards the front of the midfield, Lawrence?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair place to put them at the minute, based on how good this test has been for them across all 3 days. I think Carlos was talking today in the press conference about how he did the best job that he could yesterday, and there was still a little bit more to come. Alex, obviously the driver who's got that experience with the Williams team, that he'll know what the previous iterations have been and where they're lacking. And so it'll be interesting actually to talk to him a little bit about how he felt. But I think they had another strong day where maybe they could explore a few different setups. And they're heading into the first race in Australia better prepared at the start of the season for 3, 4, 5 years, I think. And from that perspective, I think it's strong. Whether or not they've shut the gap to the front, I don't think that's what the story is. The story is that they are up towards the front of the midfield with 2 drivers who will hopefully help them push on from there.
Both in Alpine are the best of the rest teams, and I was just busy building a case for the gulf in the middle of the F1 pack to close when I started watching Alpine's race run as it got cooler and the quick teams really took off into this evening. And the gulf just opened back up again. You know, it was about a second as they were running lap on lap into the darkness in terms of race running. I'd have to have a look at the compound, but I think the race pace, as we've seen in previous years, will be the difficulty in terms of challenging for, you know, the podium positions or the top 5 positions. There will, though, be a race. I'm happy from the test that there will be a race where one of those teams finds the podium this year. Because I just think that they're...
A Williams or Alpine podium?
I think they're close enough.
I love a bold prediction,
They were
Brundle.
both bulletproof as well. Bulletproof, as so many teams were throughout the whole test. And I think there will be a messy race this year where they find the podium again.
I'll enjoy that. That sounds a cracking weekend. Okay, we're going to move on then to teams perhaps with a bit of work to do. Firstly, though, we're wishing the speediest of recoveries to Aston Martin's Lance Stroll. He was unwell overnight. The team swapped the running round, so Fernando then came in the morning to cover Lance's shift, in a sense. Lance then came back into the car for the afternoon, valiantly completed the 34 laps, but ultimately just wasn't well enough to continue the session and to get the running in that Aston Martin needed. But with a bit of lost time on day 1 as well, it's been a bit of a challenging test, therefore, for them.
Yeah, I think Aston Martin are fighting Sauber for probably the most difficult test so far this year. I think both of those teams have had so many problems. Sauber's slightly better day to day, but like Aston, they were in no man's land last year, you know, in that P5 off the top 4 ahead of the midfield, and I think there was a lot of expectation that maybe they'd made some real gains this year. And we just don't know is the answer, because we just haven't seen the car out there enough. There was no rhythm. I think you were talking to Pedro de la Rosa and said at least Lance got in the car to do some tests there, but they just didn't have the consistency or the rhythms to go away. And they're going to have data, but it's not going to be of the quality, I don't think, of the other 4 teams ahead of them.
I was out on track while Lance was driving, actually, and he was behind the car. So I do hope he's feeling better really, really soon, because you could see he was physically struggling in the car. I would like to have seen Aston have a better day today. I mean, it's such a disturbance for the team when you have to basically bin the run plan because the driver's not feeling well enough and then go with Alonso. But it's important to remember that on day 1, we were talking about how mega they were. They were mega in the middle sector in comparison to everybody else, apparently. You know, they're running through a test plan. I think it's important not to totally bin them at this stage, Aston. I mean, we're not binning anyone, right? It's pre-season testing, but you know, there are some strengths to that car. You know, in the middle sector on day 1, they look really strong. It's just as the test has progressed on, I think they've not moved quite as fast as some of the other teams in terms of continuing to develop. In terms of the lap times we see anyway.
Yeah, I think it's just looking at worst, they're where they were last year. So that's what we're talking about. It's just more that they'd come in with these ambitions of making progress, and they haven't been able to do that in the very limited amount of testing that they had. And we're going to head to Australia, which is not a representative track.
Yep.
Then they're going to be playing catch-up, and then they're going to have to turn the taps off anyway, because they're going to be focused on 26. So I think this year, more than ever, you needed to be bulletproof, like 8 of the teams, I'd say, were, and they unfortunately weren't.
It's an engine change as well, isn't it, for them into 2026? So it's a move to a different power unit partner, which is another big shift. And as you say, Lawrence, the taps potentially with that change turned off even earlier. Obviously, Newey coming in on March the 1st and potentially starting work for them as well. So that focus will move.
Well, they're doing their own gearbox. They're doing the new suspension, their own suspension won't take them from Mercedes as well. It's all new for Aston, so I feel for them.
Yeah, and they really wanted a test in which they could kick on, as you guys have said. They didn't quite have that. Fernando Alonso also having a cold as well this week, and Pedro de la Rosa blaming the Bahraini weather for that, which is probably the first time we've ever heard that here in Bahrain, but it has been very, very cold at times here at this track. Okay, Haas as well today caused a bit of a stir earlier on as bodywork from Ollie Behrman's car ripped off and was sort of discarded down the home straight. Brundle, your thoughts on that? I mean, it wasn't a big issue, and Haas have been seemingly doing a bit of a different kind of run plan, doing a lot of heavy fuel running, but it kind of was one of those issues in which we saw a weakness perhaps in Haas's car.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, you see full liveries on all of the cars this year, but just a reminder of how tight they are on weight. They've got 2 kilos extra moving into this season to play with. But even the carbon that flailed off the Haas is just paper thin. Everybody on the absolute ragged edge on delivering a car to weight because of the current regulation set. Honestly, they'll bulk that up. They'll sort it out. They'll find a solution elsewhere. Not a drama, but just a bit of a moment for us to look at. An exciting moment as well for Sam Collins, who got to dig into the side of a Formula One car, which is something he loves to do, I know.
Yeah, he did. I sent the camera down there in the pit lane. We were both standing there, and Ed on camera, I think, got right in there, zooming right in for Sam to really get proper nerdy, and that's the best Sam Collins we can ever ask for. Delamination of the honeycomb, I believe, was the official line from the team as to what happened, but maybe a point of weakness they will have to take a closer look at as the season progresses and indeed begins next time out in Melbourne. Okay, we're going to look overall at testing so far and look at our highlights. Lawrence.
I think it's Lewis. I think the way that he's settled into his new team at Ferrari has been incredible. I know when Fred was talking last year, he was like, I've got no worries. He's a 7-time world champion. He's got all this experience. And I was still like, well, he's going to a new team with a new engine, new culture. But the way he has settled in has been pretty phenomenal. The way he was putting in lap times yesterday particularly, and then the way he was talking and the body language at his presser yesterday was good. Today his race run didn't look as good actually when we were looking at kind of what he was putting together. But just generally speaking, for the very limited running that he's had, I think he's done an incredible job to be able to throw that car around really quite comfortably and confidently. And I'm sure you would have seen that, Alex, when you were out there on track. In 1.5 days of testing with very limited running before this. So yeah, he's really impressed me.
Yeah, dealing with a difficult balance at times and moving the car forward. My highlight of the test is Kimi Antonelli. I really enjoyed watching him trackside. Second quickest in his session yesterday. Quickest in his session yesterday. Second quickest today, and he's just going for it all the time behind the wheel of that Mercedes. If you unplugged his name from that lap sheet and plugged in an established driver, nobody would argue with you when you look at the times that he was delivering on track, which is impressive. You know, imagine it. You've come from Formula 2. You wander into Mercedes F1. It's your first test as a full season Grand Prix driver. You get in and there were some scruffy moments here and there, but you're just pumping in the race runs. Really impressive to watch. I liked it.
And actually seeing how he's conducting himself as well within the team, within the garage, in press conferences, you know, in social media clips that we've done with him as well. He's full of confidence, not arrogance, confidence, and he's loving life. He's clearly just absolutely embracing this opportunity that he's got. But also, I think there was a lot of questions as to whether he was ready for it. I think mentally, for me, he certainly seems more than ready for the challenges that lie ahead for him. So, and I know what you mean as to why he was a highlight of this test. I think for me, it was probably the moment that Lando Norris was covered in bubble wrap and the McLaren mechanics covered.
They're supposed to wrap them in cotton wool, Laura.
I know, not for Lando. Not for Lando. He was covered in Flovis, bubble wrap, all sorts. You've both gone for something really meaningful and special for your highlights. And in the office before I went, well, it's Lando and Flovis, isn't it? And apparently that's not the right answer. So what I will say instead is that I do believe McLaren, and I think we'll come to this in the pecking order prediction, but Ferrari and the way in which they've both conducted this test is shaping up for me to be an almighty battle. Every single lap of every single race weekend, and I think the reliability of all of these teams as well that we've seen means that we're in for such a close season up and down the grid. We were loving the fights at every part of this grid in 2024, and I think that's only going to converge and intensify through this season. And with that, here's our pecking order prediction. And actually, we have not discussed this prior, so wish us luck. Are we all agreed that McLaren will be top, or should we start from the bottom and work our way up?
No, I'd agree that McLaren are top.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, McLaren top, and you've put me in the position where I have to go first. Isn't that nice?
Well, we can do it collaboratively if you like. We're teammates.
No,
we're teammates.
No,
do you want to be?
That's no fun.
He wants to be the star. Everyone,
I'll be the hammer that strikes on this one. I'm going to go for McLaren, then Mercedes, then Red Bull, then Mercedes.
Where's Ferrari?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it yet. I'm not seeing it, and the reason I'm not seeing it is I saw a lot of difficult balance for Lewis at the beginning of this afternoon. He drove the car well, and I saw them go. I saw them lose a lot of running time as well this afternoon through to the end of the day, and it would be that for me.
But I think as well as I was saying that Lewis has got on, he's still got a long way to go to be super, super comfortable with that car. So
It's a pun, right? It's a pun.
Yeah, but I think, well, to put the quality of the run that he put in to try and match Charles's this morning was probably a big ask. I'm going to put Ferrari second. I think it's McLaren and Ferrari, like you said, and then it's Mercedes Red Bull. I think it's very similar to what we saw at the end of last year, if I'm honest, and we shouldn't be surprised. It's the continuation of regs into the fourth year and the way that they're spending the money probably slightly more frugally. So I just think it'll be closer. So I think that's the top four.
Yes, I think we can all agree that's the top four. I'm then thinking 5, 6. Dare I say Williams and Alpine?
Yes.
Dare I say it? Dare we say Williams for P5?
I think so. I think it's Williams and Alpine, isn't it, fighting for that spot with Aston, an unknown who could pop back up quite quickly into P5.
Totally agree.
And so then we have Haas, VCarb and Sauber. Would we put them in that order?
I'll put Haas above VCarb, I think.
VCarb had, in terms of all of the teams who I think or any team I think are out of position, I think VCarb had the most difficult test of any team in comparison to where they would expect to be. Difficult balance, not a lot of pace. They put in a very sort of under-the-radar performance run at the end of today, which just popped them up slightly towards the middle of the pack. It's not worked. Something's not worked for VCarb.
But we're saying that Sauber is still P10 at the moment.
I think so. Yeah, it just feels everything from inside the team is that they haven't just kicked on as much as they'd hoped. I think they had quite big expectations of at least hauling themselves within the pack. At the moment, they're at the bottom. But I do think that generally the midfield's close. So we're going to go to one race and one team is going to be strong. Then we'll go to another and another will be strong. So I think even if you are P8 or P9, don't hate us because I think another circuit you could perform well if you could.
Just look at the way the playing field flipped today when we warmed the track up ever so slightly. And that's what we're going to see all season long.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the joy of Formula One for this season as well, that we are going to see that pecking order flipped on its head from race weekend to race weekend. 1 minute we're going to look like heroes getting it right, and the next zero's getting it very wrong. Probably mostly getting it very wrong. But we love to make predictions here. Well, thank you both so much for all of your insights over 3 really brilliant but very, very long days here in the slightly chilly Bahrain. That is it from pre-season testing here at the Bahrain International Circuit. Do join us for the Australian Grand Prix, where Formula One returns. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.